ex-wife's new husband called me a beggar. Then I withdrew $2 million. The room froze in shock. My name is David Nolan. I'm 42, and for 3 years after my divorce, I lived in a modest apartment while my ex-wife Rhea enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle she'd always demanded. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a tech empire worth over $50 million. When her arrogant new husband Orion publicly humiliated me at our daughter's school fundraiser, calling me a pathetic beggar in front of everyone, I decided it was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. But what happened next shocked everyone in that room and changed my family's life forever. Before I tell you how I made Orion eat his words, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth. Growing up in San Francisco's Chinatown wasn't easy for a kid obsessed with computers. My parents, Lynn and Wei Nolan, ran a small restaurant that barely broke even month after month. While other kids played outside, I spent hours in the back room teaching myself programming languages and dreaming of building something bigger than our cramped 2-bedroom apartment above the restaurant. My father worked 16-hour days, his hands permanently stained with grease from the Kit Nolan, while my mother managed the books with an ancient calculator that had seen better decades. "David," my father would tell me in his broken English, "work hard, save money, build future. Not like us, we came too late to America to start big dreams." But I had different plans. By 14, I was building websites for local businesses, charging $50 here and $100 there. My first real breakthrough came junior year of high school when I created an inventory management system for restaurants. My parents' place was my testing ground, and watching their efficiency improve gave me confidence that I was onto something meaningful. College at Berkeley was funded entirely through scholarships and my growing web development side business. I studied computer science while secretly working on what would eventually become my first startup, a cloud-based restaurant management platform. My dorm room looked like a command center, multiple monitors covering every available surface, energy drink cans stacked like monuments to sleepless nights. That's where I met Rhea at a campus coffee shop during my junior year. She was studying marketing, beautiful in that effortless way that made other girls envious, and seemed genuinely interested in my ambitious plans for changing how restaurants operated. She'd bring me sandwiches during all-night coding sessions, listen patiently as I explained complex algorithms, and make me feel like my dreams weren't just possible, but inevitable. "You're going to be huge someday," she'd whisper, while massaging my shoulders after particularly brutal programming marathons. "And I want to be there when it happens." Her confidence in me felt intoxicating, especially coming from someone who could have dated any guy on campus. We married right after graduation in a small ceremony at my parents' restaurant. Rhea wore a simple white dress that cost more than my parents made in 2 months, but she insisted it was perfect. My father gave a toast in heavily accented English that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how proud he was that his son had found both love and purpose. The early years of marriage were challenging but exciting. I launched my first company, Restaurant OS, from our tiny apartment while Rhea worked at a marketing firm downtown. She handled our social media presence and customer communications, while I focused on development and sales. We were a team, building something together from nothing. Success came gradually, then suddenly. Restaurant OS gained traction with small independent restaurants, then mid-sized chains, and finally caught the attention of major food service companies. By our 5th wedding anniversary, we'd grown from a 2-person operation to a company with 30 employees and $2 million in annual revenue. That's when Rhea began changing. Success brought opportunities for expensive dinners, networking events, and social circles that demanded a certain lifestyle. The woman who once brought me peanut butter sandwiches started complaining about our modest house, our practical Honda Civic, and my reluctance to spend money on things she considered essential for our image. David, we need to look successful, she'd argue while browsing luxury car websites. People judge you by what you drive, where you live, how you dress. You can't close million-dollar deals wearing khakis from Target. She wasn't entirely wrong, but something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. I tried to balance her desires with my ingrained frugality learned from watching my parents struggle. We upgraded to a nicer house, bought her a BMW, and started attending country club events where Rhea seemed to thrive, while I felt increasingly out of place among people who'd inherited wealth rather than built it. Our daughter Tessa was born during this period of rapid growth, both personally and professionally. I was working 80-hour weeks expanding Restaurant OS, while Rhea managed our increasingly complex social obligations. She was an excellent mother in many ways, but I noticed she spent more time planning Tessa's designer nursery than actually holding her. The cracks in our marriage became more visible as my second company, Cloud Kit Nolan, exploded beyond all expectations. What started as a side project to help restaurants manage delivery services became a major player in the food tech industry almost overnight. Suddenly, we were worth tens of millions on paper, but Rhea's appetite for luxury grew even faster than our bank account. "I married an entrepreneur, not an accountant," she'd snap when I questioned expensive purchases. "Other wives get to enjoy their husband's success. Why do I have to justify every purchase to someone who refuses to spend money on anything meaningful?" The fights became more frequent and more bitter. The final straw came during Tessa's 7th birthday party. Rhea had organized an elaborate celebration at our country club that cost more than most people make in 6 months. As I watched 7-year-olds being served by uniformed waiters while their parents discussed vacation homes and private schools, I felt completely disconnected from the life we'd built. That night, Rhea delivered an ultimatum disguised as a conversation. "David, I need you to understand something. I didn't sign up to be married to someone who acts poor despite being rich. Either you start acting like the successful man you are, or I'll find someone who appreciates what we've achieved." I tried to explain that my hesitation to spend wasn't about being cheap. It was about remembering where we came from and staying grounded despite our success. But Rhea had already mentally moved on. She'd started spending time with Orion Wellington, a real estate developer whose inherited wealth allowed him to live the lifestyle she craved without any of the anxiety that came with earning it. The divorce was swift and expensive. Rhea's lawyer painted me as a man who hoarded wealth while denying his family basic comforts. She got our house, half of our liquid assets, and substantial alimony payments. More painfully, she got primary custody of Tessa with me, relegated to weekends and alternating holidays. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment downtown, closer to my offices but a world away from the life I'd built. The contrast was jarring, going from a 4,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage to a place where Tessa had to sleep on a pull-out couch during her visits. "Why can't you get a bigger place, Daddy?" Tessa asked during one of our weekend visits, her 8-year-old honesty cutting deeper than any lawyer's argument. "Mommy says you could afford it, but you're being stubborn." I struggled to explain complex emotions to a child who just wanted her father to have a bedroom for her. Rhea's relationship with Orion moved quickly from discreet dating to public displays of wealth. Within 6 months of our divorce being finalized, they were engaged. Orion was everything I wasn't: tall, handsome in a classical way, and completely comfortable with ostentatious displays of wealth. He drove a Ferrari, owned multiple properties, and treated money like something to be spent rather than carefully managed. Tessa would return from visits to their house with stories about Orion's boat, their weekends in Napa, and the private school they were considering for her education. "Orion says money is meant to be enjoyed," she'd report innocently, not understanding she was twisting a knife I hadn't realized was there. The wedding was everything Rhea had always wanted, a $200,000 affair at an exclusive vineyard with celebrities catering and enough flowers to stock a florist shop. I wasn't invited, of course, but the photos dominated her social media for weeks. Rhea looked radiant in a designer gown that cost more than most cars, while Orion beamed with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about money a day in his life. Meanwhile, I was quietly building my third company, TechFlow Solutions, focused on AI-driven logistics for the hospitality industry. Unlike my previous ventures, I kept this one completely private, revealing nothing about its progress to anyone except my core team and trusted advisors. The divorce had taught me the value of discretion. TechFlow was my most ambitious project yet, combining machine learning with real-time data analysis to revolutionize how restaurants, hotels, and event venues managed their operations. The technology we developed could predict demand, optimize staffing, reduce waste, and increase profitability in ways that seemed almost magical to our early clients. Major corporations began reaching out within months of our stealth launch. Marriott International implemented our system across 200 properties. McDonald's tested our drive-through optimization technology in 500 locations. Starbucks used our inventory management AI to reduce waste by 30% while improving customer satisfaction scores. But I kept living in my modest apartment, driving my reliable Toyota Camry, and maintaining the image of someone still recovering from an expensive divorce. When Tessa asked why I didn't live somewhere nicer, I'd tell her I was saving money to secure her future education. It wasn't entirely untrue, but it wasn't the complete picture either. The truth was that TechFlow had attracted acquisition interest from tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. The offers started at $20 million and quickly escalated as our technology proved its value in real-world applications. By Tessa's 9th birthday, we were fielding offers approaching $50 million for a company most people didn't even know existed. Rhea and Orion seemed to take perverse pleasure in my apparent financial struggles. At Tessa's school events, they'd arrive in Orion's latest luxury car while making subtle comments about my more modest appearance. "David's going through a difficult adjustment period," Rhea would tell other parents with mock sympathy. "Divorce can be financially devastating for entrepreneurs who overextend themselves." Orion was less subtle in his contempt. During one particularly uncomfortable school pickup, he'd made a point of asking loudly if I needed help with Tessa's private school tuition. "No shame in accepting assistance from family," he'd said with a smirk that made several other parents look uncomfortable. But the final insult came at Eastbrook Academy's annual fundraising gala, a $500 per plate dinner I attended only because Tessa had specifically asked me to come watch her perform in the school choir. Rhea and Orion arrived fashionably late in his newest acquisition, a limited edition Lamborghini that attracted more attention than the charity auction. I was sitting alone at a table near the back, having purchased the cheapest ticket available, when Orion approached with 2 glasses of champagne and an expression that promised trouble. "David," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I'm surprised to see you here. Can you actually afford events like this?" The conversation was clearly meant to be overheard. Other parents, many of whom I recognized from previous school events, began paying attention to what they sensed would be entertaining drama. Rhea watched from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read, anticipation mixed with something that might have been concern. "Tessa wanted me to see her perform," I replied quietly, hoping to avoid a scene at our daughter's school event. But Orion wasn't interested in discretion. "That's touching," he continued, his voice carrying easily across the dining room. "But seriously, if money's tight, you should have said something. Rhea and I would have been happy to sponsor your ticket. We know how difficult things have been since the divorce." The humiliation was intentional and complete. I could feel dozens of eyes watching our interaction, some with sympathy, others with the uncomfortable fascination people have for public embarrassment. A few parents looked away entirely, unwilling to witness what was clearly meant to be my social destruction. "I appreciate the offer," I said, standing to leave before the situation escalated further, but Orion wasn't finished. "Actually, David, since we're family now, maybe we should talk about Tessa's future." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. "Rhea and I have been discussing her education, and frankly, we're concerned about your ability to contribute meaningfully to her private school tuition, college fund, and other necessities." The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Tessa's choir practicing in the adjacent auditorium. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, sensing the tension that was building between us. "We've prepared some documents," Orion continued, producing a folder from his jacket with theatrical precision. "Nothing complicated, just a formal agreement acknowledging that Rhea and I will handle Tessa's major expenses going forward. It would relieve you of financial obligations you clearly can't meet, and ensure Tessa gets everything she deserves." He placed the folder on the table in front of me with a gesture that was meant to be generous but felt deeply condescending. "There's no shame in admitting you're in over your head financially. Better to be honest about your limitations than to let pride hurt Tessa's opportunities." Rhea had moved closer during Orion's monologue, her expression unreadable, but not stopping her husband's public humiliation of her daughter's father. Around us, other parents pretended to be engaged in their own conversations while obviously listening to every word. "Take your time reading through everything," Orion said with false magnanimity. "But don't take too long. Tessa's future won't wait for your financial situation to improve. And honestly, we both know that's unlikely to happen anytime soon." That's when I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation, the assumptions, the casual cruelty of someone who had never built anything meaningful in his life. It all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. I looked at Orion's smug expression, at Rhea's carefully neutral face, at the folder of documents designed to formally acknowledge my supposed financial inadequacy. I smiled. "Orion," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent dining room, "I appreciate your concern for Tessa's future. In fact, I share it completely. Which is why I think you should see something before I sign any documents acknowledging financial limitations." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the screen bright enough for him to see clearly. My finger hovered over the account balance for TechFlow Solutions, the company that had just accepted a $47 million acquisition offer from Microsoft 3 days earlier. "I've been keeping this private out of respect for Tessa's need for stability," I continued. "But since you're so concerned about my ability to provide for my daughter's future, maybe transparency is the better approach." I turned the phone screen toward Orion, watching his expression change as he processed the number displayed. $47,832,405.67. The silence in the room became absolute. Orion's face went through several color changes: confusion, disbelief, then a slow, dawning horror as he realized what he was looking at. Rhea stepped closer, her eyes widening as she read the screen over his shoulder. "This represents the sale of my third company to Microsoft," I explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "The transaction closed Monday morning. After taxes and expenses, it should net around $35 million, which, when combined with my existing assets from Restaurant Us and CloudKit Nolan, puts my current worth somewhere north of $50 million. The folder of documents slipped from Orion's suddenly nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the table. Around us, other parents had given up all pretense of not listening, their conversations dying as they processed what they were hearing. "Yeah, I've been living modestly," I continued, "not because of financial necessity, but because I wanted Tessa to understand that wealth should be earned and managed responsibly, not displayed like a trophy. Something I learned from parents who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had." Rhea's face had gone completely white. She understood the implications immediately, not just the financial revelation, but what it meant about the assumptions she'd built her new life around. "But since you've made Tessa's financial security a public concern," I said, my voice hardening slightly, "let me assure everyone here that her education, college fund, and any other necessities are more than adequately covered. In fact," I opened another app on my phone, this one showing the college fund I'd been quietly building for Tessa since her birth. The balance showed $2.3 million in diversified investments. Tessa's education is funded through graduate school at any institution she chooses to attend. Her college fund has been growing for 9 years and should be worth close to $5 million by the time she's 18, assuming average market returns. Orion had still not spoken, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The smug confidence that had carried him through his public humiliation of me had evaporated completely, leaving behind a man who suddenly realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. "As for your generous offer to handle Tessa's expenses," I continued, "I think we can both agree that won't be necessary. In fact, if you're struggling financially, Orion, perhaps we should discuss how I might help you. Family supporting family, as you said." The reversal was complete and devastating. In the span of 5 minutes, Orion had gone from publicly humiliating someone he perceived as a financially struggling ex-husband to being revealed as someone whose inherited wealth paled in comparison to what he'd assumed was poverty. But I wasn't finished. "There is one thing I'd like to clarify for everyone here," I said, my voice carrying easily across the still silent room. When Orion suggested I might be in over my head financially, he wasn't entirely wrong. I have been struggling with something, but not money. I looked directly at Rhea, seeing recognition dawning in her eyes. "I've been struggling with how to tell Tessa that her father is wealthy without teaching her that wealth defines worth. I've been struggling with how to provide her with opportunities without robbing her of the work ethic that created those opportunities. And I've been struggling with how to be a good parent when her mother chose someone who measures success by the price of his car, rather than the value of his character." The silence stretched uncomfortably as my words sank in. Several parents were openly staring now, the social dynamics of the room having shifted completely in the span of a few minutes. "But tonight has clarified something for me," I continued. "Tessa doesn't need to be protected from knowing about her family's financial security. What she needs is to understand that true wealth comes from how you treat people, especially when you think they can't do anything for you." I gathered up the scattered documents from Orion's folder, glancing through the legal language that would have formally acknowledged my supposed financial inadequacy. The irony was almost amusing, papers designed to humiliate someone who could have bought Orion's lifestyle several times over. "I won't be signing these," I said, placing the papers back in the folder and setting it in front of Orion. "But I will be making some changes going forward." I pulled out my phone again and called my real estate agent, who answered immediately despite the evening hour. "Jennifer, it's David Nolan. Remember that house in Pacific Heights we looked at last month? The one Tessa fell in love with during our drive-by? I want to make an offer. No, not the asking price. Cash offer. $500,000 over asking. I want it closed within 2 weeks." The conversation continued for another minute while everyone in the dining room listened to me arrange the purchase of a $3.2 million house with the casual efficiency of someone buying groceries. When I hung up, I looked around the room at faces that showed a mixture of shock, admiration, and, in a few cases, calculation, as parents reconsidered their assumptions about the quiet man who drove a modest car and lived in a downtown apartment. "Tessa will have her own room when she visits," I announced to no one in particular, "with space for friends to stay over, if she'd like. I think it's time she experienced what financial security can provide without losing sight of what actually matters." Rhea finally found her voice. "David, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked," I replied quietly. "You assumed." Both of you assumed that because I didn't display wealth, I didn't possess it. Because I didn't treat money as a toy, I didn't have enough to matter. Because I chose to live modestly, I was living that way out of necessity rather than preference. I turned to Orion, who had finally managed to close his mouth, but still looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Orion, your attempt to humiliate me tonight has actually done me a favor. It's shown me that protecting Tessa from knowledge of our family's financial situation was misguided. She should know that her father can provide for her future, so she never feels insecure about her place in the world. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. But more importantly, tonight has shown her something else. It's shown her the difference between having money and being worthy of respect. Between displaying wealth and possessing character. Between inheriting privilege and earning success. The dining room remained frozen in uncomfortable silence. Parents who had witnessed what they expected to be my social destruction were instead watching Orion shrink into his expensive suit, while Rhea looked like she was reconsidering every assumption she'd built her new life upon. I need to go watch Tessa perform now, I said, straightening my modest sport coat with dignity. Unlike some people here, I don't attend my daughter's events to make statements about my financial status. I come because being present for the people you love is the only wealth that actually matters. As I walked away from the table, I heard the murmur of conversation finally resuming behind me. But the energy had changed completely. Instead of whispered sympathy for the struggling ex-husband, I caught fragments of amazed speculation about the tech entrepreneur who had been hiding in plain sight. Tessa's choir performance was beautiful, her clear voice carrying across the auditorium as she sang with the confidence of a child who felt supported and loved. I watched from the audience, my heart full of pride that had nothing to do with bank balances and everything to do with the remarkable young person she was becoming. After the performance, Tessa bounded over to me with the excitement that made all the drama worthwhile. "Daddy, did you like the song? Mrs. Peterson said my solo part was perfect." Her happiness was infectious and grounding, reminding me what actually mattered in life. "You were magnificent," I told her honestly. I recorded the whole thing to watch again later. I had indeed been recording, though the earlier confrontation with Orion felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. "Are you staying for the dessert reception?" she asked hopefully. "Mom and Orion are here too, but there's chocolate cake, and I want to show you the art project I made for the auction." I glanced across the room where Rhea and Orion stood in uncomfortable conversation with other parents. Orion looked diminished somehow, his earlier arrogance replaced by the awkward posture of someone who had made a very public mistake. Rhea kept glancing in our direction with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Of course I'm staying," I told Tessa. "Lead the way to this famous art project." The rest of the evening passed in a surreal mixture of normalcy and underlying tension. Tessa introduced me to her friends and their parents with the unconscious pride of a daughter who loved her father, while behind us I could feel the weight of changed perceptions following our interactions. Several parents approached me throughout the evening, their conversations carefully probing the boundaries of what had been revealed earlier. Dr. Martinez, whose daughter was in Tessa's class, congratulated me on the Microsoft acquisition as if it were public knowledge rather than something he'd overheard during a dramatic confrontation. "Tech entrepreneurs are the backbone of innovation," he said with the easy confidence of someone revising his social calculations in real time. "I'd love to discuss some investment opportunities with you sometime, if you're interested in diversifying into medical technology." Others were more direct in their curiosity about TechFlow solutions, asking questions that revealed they'd immediately researched my company after witnessing the evening's drama. The speed with which social dynamics could shift based on perceived financial status was both amusing and depressing. But the most meaningful conversation came from Mrs. Patterson, a widow whose quiet dignity had always impressed me during school events. She approached as I was admiring Tessa's mixed media sculpture in the silent auction display. Mr. Nolan, she said quietly, I wanted to tell you how much I admired your restraint earlier this evening. Lesser men would have responded to that provocation very differently. Her words carried the weight of someone who had observed a lot of human behavior over many years. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Tessa was performing tonight, and that was more important than any personal drama. The truth of that statement felt solid and reassuring after the emotional chaos of the earlier confrontation. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who understands what truly matters, she continued. Too many parents get confused about whether they're raising children or impressing other adults. Her gentle criticism of the broader parent community was diplomatically delivered but unmistakably pointed. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing near the school's main entrance with Tessa, waiting for Rhea to finish her conversation so they could leave together. The earlier drama felt distant now, overwhelmed by the simple pleasure of watching Tessa excitedly recount details of her performance for the third time. Rhea finally approached us, her earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Orion trailed behind her, looking like he wished he could disappear entirely. David, Rhea began hesitantly, could we talk privately for a moment? I looked at Tessa, who was already yawning despite her excitement. It's getting late, and Tessa has school tomorrow. Maybe we could schedule something for later in the week? Please, Rhea insisted, her voice carrying an urgency that made me reconsider. Just for a few minutes, Orion can stay with Tessa. The suggestion that Orion would babysit Tessa while we talked struck me as particularly ironic given the evening's events, but Tessa seemed comfortable enough with the arrangement. We walked a few steps away, far enough for privacy, but close enough to keep Tessa in sight. I owe you an apology, Rhea began without preamble. Actually, I owe you several apologies, but I don't even know where to start. You don't owe me anything, Rhea, I replied honestly. We've both moved on with our lives. Tonight was just clarifying. That's just it, she said, frustration creeping into her voice. I thought I had moved on, but clearly I've been carrying assumptions that were completely wrong. About your financial situation, about your priorities, about everything. I studied her face in the dim light from the school's entrance. She looked genuinely distressed rather than simply embarrassed, as if the evening's revelations had forced her to reconsider more than just my bank balance. The money doesn't change anything between us, I told her. We got divorced because we wanted different things from life, not because of financial pressures. Tonight's drama doesn't alter any of that history. But it does change things for Tessa, Rhea said quietly. And maybe that's what I'm really struggling with. I've been making decisions about her future based on assumptions that were completely false. The private school discussions, the college planning, the financial arrangements, all of it was built on me thinking you couldn't contribute meaningfully. The honesty in her admission surprised me. Rhea had never been someone who acknowledged mistakes easily, particularly ones that involved admitting she'd been wrong about something fundamental. Tessa's future has always been secure, I said gently. Whether you knew about my financial situation or not, I would never have let her lack for opportunities or security. That's what fathers do. I know that now, Rhea replied, her voice thick with what might have been tears. But I didn't trust it before. I thought I had to be the parent who ensured her stability because you couldn't. And that assumption led me to make choices I'm not sure I can defend anymore. She glanced back at Orion, who was awkwardly making conversation with Tessa about her art project. Even from a distance, it was clear he was struggling to connect with a 9-year-old whose interests didn't align with his adult preoccupations. Orion isn't a bad person, Rhea continued, following my gaze. But he's not. He doesn't understand what tonight revealed. About you, about us, about the assumptions we've all been making. What assumptions? I asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. That wealth and character are the same thing. That displaying success and achieving it are equivalent. That someone who chooses to live modestly is doing so from necessity rather than principle. She paused, considering her words carefully. That marrying someone rich would make me happy in ways that building something meaningful with someone couldn't. The admission hung between us like a confession she hadn't intended to make. I could see her processing the implications of her own words as she spoke them. "Rhea," I said carefully, "you made the right choice for yourself at the time. We wanted different things, lived different values, had different ideas about what success looked like. None of that has changed because of tonight's revelations. But maybe my reasons for wanting those things were wrong," she replied. "Maybe I confused security with luxury, stability with status. Maybe I left a good thing for the wrong reasons." The vulnerability in her voice was genuine, but it was also 3 years too late. Whatever feelings I'd once had for Rhea had been processed through divorce proceedings, custody negotiations, and the painful work of building a new life after the end of a marriage. "We can't relitigate our marriage," I told her gently, "but we can move forward as better co-parents for Tessa." Tonight showed me that keeping my financial situation private wasn't protecting her. It was actually creating insecurity about her future that she didn't need to carry. Rhea nodded, seeming to accept the boundary I was drawing around our past relationship while acknowledging the co-parenting reality that would continue indefinitely. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Tessa, I mean. Are you going to change the custody arrangement, the living situation, the financial agreements?" "I'm going to buy a house where Tessa can have her own room," I said. "And I'm going to be more open with her about our family's financial security so she never has to worry about her future opportunities. Beyond that, I think we should focus on making sure she feels loved and supported by both of her parents." "And Orion?" Rhea asked quietly. I looked back at her husband, who was now crouched down to Tessa's level, trying to engage with her enthusiasm about her art project. His discomfort was obvious, but his effort seemed genuine. "Orion is your husband, and part of Tessa's life now," I said diplomatically. "Tonight was uncomfortable for everyone, but people can learn from mistakes if they choose to." What I didn't say was that Orion would need to do some serious self-reflection about how he treated people he perceived as beneath him socially or financially. The arrogance he'd displayed earlier wasn't just directed at me, it reflected an attitude that would shape how he interacted with Tessa as she grew up. "I should go," Rhea said finally. "This conversation has given me a lot to think about, and Tessa needs to get home for school tomorrow." "Rhea?" I called as she started to walk away. "For what it's worth, I hope things work out for you. Both of you. Tessa deserves to see the adults in her life treating each other with respect." She nodded, her expression grateful but still troubled by whatever internal reckoning the evening had triggered. 3 months later, Tessa was sprawling across the hardwood floors of our new house in Pacific Heights, her homework spread out in the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge. The space was everything she'd dreamed of when we'd driven past it months earlier, room to spread out, space for friends to visit, and most importantly, a sense of permanence that helped her understand this was truly her home too. "Daddy, can Sophia come over this weekend for a sleepover?" she asked, looking up from her math worksheet with the hopeful expression that had been melting my resolve since she learned to smile. "Of course," I replied, settling into the reading chair I'd positioned to overlook her homework space. "Should I plan something special for Saturday activities?" "Mom said you might take us to that new science museum in Oakland," Tessa said with the casual way children dropped information that revealed adult conversations they'd overheard. "She said you've been supporting their educational programs." The Oakland Science Discovery Center had indeed received a substantial anonymous donation from the Nolan Family Foundation, something I'd established to channel charitable giving in a more organized way. Rhea's knowledge of my philanthropic activities suggested she'd been researching my business interests more thoroughly than I'd realized. "We could definitely do that," I agreed. "Though I should probably check with Sophia's parents first. Museum visits can be long days." They already said yes. Tessa replied with the confidence of a child who had clearly orchestrated this entire conversation. Mom called them yesterday. The coordination between Rhea and me had improved dramatically since the school fundraiser incident. We'd developed a more collaborative approach to Tessa's schedule and activities, with both of us making efforts to ensure she felt equally supported in both homes. Orion had also made changes, though they seemed to require more conscious effort on his part. He'd enrolled in parenting classes, something Rhea had mentioned with appreciation during one of our monthly co-parenting check-ins. His interactions with Tessa were becoming more natural, though still somewhat formal compared to the easy relationship she'd always had with both Rhea and me. "How are things going with Orion?" I asked carefully, curious about Tessa's perspective on her stepfather's evolution. "He's trying really hard," Tessa replied with the diplomatic honesty of a child navigating adult relationships. "He bought books about stuff I like and asks me questions about school projects. It's nice, but sometimes it feels like he's studying me instead of just talking to me." Her observation was remarkably perceptive. Orion was indeed approaching his relationship with Tessa like a project to be mastered rather than a connection to be developed naturally. But his effort was genuine, and that mattered more than perfect execution. "People learn to be good step-parents the same way they learn anything else," I told her. "It takes practice and patience from everyone involved." "I know," Tessa said, returning her attention to her homework. "Mom explained that too. She says grown-ups sometimes have to learn new things just like kids do." The maturity in her response suggested the adults in her life were doing something right in helping her process the complex family dynamics that divorce had created. She seemed secure in her relationships with all of us rather than torn between competing loyalties. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, my real estate agent, updating me on another property I'd been considering. The success of TechFlow Solutions had opened possibilities I was still learning to navigate, including the option to purchase a vacation home where Tessa could spend extended time during school breaks. "Tessa," I said, looking up from my phone, "how would you feel about having a place to visit during summers? Somewhere near the lake? Or maybe by the ocean?" Her eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that reminded me why financial security mattered, not for the luxury itself, but for the opportunities it could create for the people I loved most. "Really? Like our own vacation house?" she asked, her math homework completely forgotten now. "Could we have a boat? And could my friends visit sometimes?" "We could definitely explore those possibilities," I said, smiling at her enthusiasm. "I was thinking somewhere within driving distance so we could go for long weekends during the school year too." "Can I help pick it out?" Tessa asked, already mentally planning adventures I could see playing out behind her eyes. "I want to make sure it has good places for exploring and maybe room for a treehouse." "I wouldn't pick a vacation home without consulting my most important advisor," I told her seriously. "After all, you're the one who's going to be making memories there." Tessa beamed at being included in such an adult decision, then paused with the thoughtful expression she got when processing complex ideas. "Will Mom and Orion be able to visit sometimes too?" she asked carefully. "I mean, not at the same time as us, but, you know." The question revealed the ongoing complexity of our blended family situation. Tessa was navigating relationships that required diplomatic skills most adults struggled with, trying to maintain connections with everyone she loved without creating conflicts. "That's something we'd need to discuss with your mom," I said diplomatically. "But the most important thing is that you feel comfortable having a place where you can relax and have fun with the people you care about." "I think Mom would like that," Tessa said with the confidence of a child who had become an expert at reading adult emotions. "She seems happier lately, less worried about things." Rhea's reduced anxiety was something I'd noticed too during our recent co-parenting conversations. The financial pressure she'd felt to secure Tessa's future had lifted once she understood the full scope of our family's resources. It had freed her to focus on being a mother rather than constantly strategizing about security. I'm glad she's feeling better, I said honestly. Happy parents usually means a happier family overall. Orion is different too, Tessa continued, her 9-year-old honesty cutting through adult pretenses. He doesn't talk about money stuff as much anymore, and he asks me about things I actually care about instead of just trying to impress me. The change in Orion's behavior had been one of the more unexpected outcomes of the fundraiser confrontation. Apparently, having his assumptions so thoroughly demolished had forced him to reconsider not just his approach to me, but his entire understanding of what impressed people and why. People can change when they learn new things about themselves, I said, hoping to reinforce the idea that growth was possible for everyone. Sometimes difficult situations help us become better versions of ourselves. Tessa nodded wisely, then returned to her homework with the focused intensity that had always characterized her approach to tasks she considered important. I watched her work, marveling at how resilient children could be when the adults in their lives provided consistent love and support. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from my business partner Jake, who had been handling the final details of the Microsoft integration while I focused on family matters. "Hey David," Jake's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering good news. "I just got off the phone with the Microsoft team. They want to discuss expanding our partnership beyond the original acquisition terms. Apparently, our AI algorithms are performing even better in their ecosystem than their projections suggested." "That's great news," I said, stepping into the Kit Nolan so Tessa could concentrate on her work. "What kind of expansion are they thinking?" "They want to integrate our technology into their Azure cloud platform and offer it as a service to their enterprise clients. We're talking about licensing deals that could generate $20, $30 million annually in recurring revenue." The numbers were staggering, representing the kind of ongoing success that would secure not just Tessa's future, but potentially her children's futures as well. But what struck me most was how differently this conversation felt compared to similar ones during my marriage to Rhea. "What's the timeline?" I asked, already thinking about how to structure deals that would provide steady income without requiring the intensive time commitment that had contributed to my marriage's breakdown. "They want to move quickly," Jake replied. "Full integration within 6 months, with the first enterprise clients coming online by next quarter. But David, this is going to require some travel and probably longer hours in the short term." I glanced back at Tessa, who was now singing quietly to herself while working through multiplication problems. The prospect of increased work demands felt different now that I had a stable custody arrangement and a clear understanding of my priorities. "Let's set up a meeting to discuss the details," I said. "But Jake, I want to make sure we structure this so it doesn't consume my life the way the early years did. Tessa's at an age where she needs consistency from both her parents." "Understood," Jake said with the easy agreement of someone who had watched me navigate the balance between business success and personal relationships. "We can build a team to handle the day-to-day management while you focus on strategic oversight." After ending the call, I returned to find Tessa packing up her completed homework with the satisfied expression of someone who had conquered a challenge. "All done?" I asked, settling back into my reading chair. "Yep, and I was thinking about the vacation house," she said with the seamless transition between topics that characterized most of our conversations. "Maybe somewhere with hiking trails? I've been reading about different kinds of birds and I want to see them in real life." "Birdwatching is an excellent hobby," I agreed. "It teaches patience and observation skills, plus it's something we could do together." "And maybe I could invite Grandma and Grandpa Nolan sometimes?" Tessa asked hopefully. "I want them to see that you became successful like you always said you would." The mention of my parents brought a complicated mix of emotions. They had sacrificed so much to give me opportunities they'd never had, working endless hours in their restaurant while I pursued dreams they didn't fully understand, but supported anyway. "I think they'd love that," I said, already imagining my father's quiet pride at seeing his son's success translate into opportunities for his granddaughter. Grandpa Nolan has been wanting to teach you how to fish properly. And Grandma Nolan could show me more Chinese cooking, Tessa added with enthusiasm. She said she'd teach me to make dumplings when I'm older. The intergenerational connections Tessa was forming with my parents had become increasingly important to me. Despite their limited English and her minimal Mandarin, they'd developed a relationship based on shared activities and mutual affection that transcended language barriers. We could definitely plan some extended visits, I agreed. Maybe alternate between the vacation house and staying with them during longer school breaks. Tessa's face lit up with the kind of joy that reminded me why all the business success mattered. It wasn't about the money itself, but about the freedom it provided to create meaningful experiences for the people I loved. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her expression turning more serious. "Are you happy now? I mean, happier than you were before?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and perceptiveness. Tessa had clearly been observing the changes in my life and trying to understand what they meant for our family's emotional dynamics. "I'm very happy," I told her honestly, "especially when I'm spending time with you." "Why do you ask?" "Because Mom said divorce is supposed to make people happier eventually, but it seemed like it made everyone sad for a really long time," Tessa replied with the matter-of-fact honesty that children brought to complex emotional situations. "Divorce is hard on everyone involved," I said carefully, "but sometimes people need different things to be happy, and that's okay. The important thing is that both your parents love you very much and want you to have a good life." "I know that," Tessa said with the confidence of a child who had never doubted her parents' love, even when their relationship with each other had been difficult. "And I think everyone is happier now, even Orion, though he tries to hide it sometimes." Her observation about Orion was particularly insightful. He had indeed seemed more relaxed in recent months, as if the pressure to prove himself superior to me had lifted once the actual dynamics of our family's financial situation became clear. "Sometimes it takes time for people to find their place in new situations," I said diplomatically. "But you're right that everyone seems more comfortable now." "Good," Tessa said with the decisive tone she used when considering a matter settled. "Because I was getting tired worrying about whether the grown-ups were okay." The admission that she'd been carrying anxiety about the adult relationships in her life hit me like a physical blow. Children shouldn't have to worry about whether their parents were managing their emotions appropriately, but divorce inevitably created situations where they did. "Tessa," I said seriously, "you should never have to worry about taking care of the adults in your life. That's our job, not yours." "I know," she replied with a maturity that was both impressive and heartbreaking. "But I couldn't help it when everyone seemed upset all the time. It's better now, though." The conversation reinforced my commitment to maintaining the stability we'd built over the past few months. Tessa deserved to focus on being a child rather than managing the emotional aftermath of adult decisions. "Speaking of things being better," I said, changing the subject to something more cheerful. "What do you think about starting to plan that summer vacation? We could look at some properties online and maybe visit a few on weekends." Tessa's excitement returned immediately, her natural enthusiasm replacing the worried expression that had appeared when discussing adult emotions. "Can we look at pictures now?" she asked hopefully. "I want to see what kinds of places are available." "Absolutely," I said, opening my laptop and pulling up real estate websites. "Let's see what adventures we can find." As we scrolled through property listings, Tessa providing commentary on everything from architectural styles to landscape features, I felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with bank balances or business achievements. This was what success actually looked like: the freedom to spend time with the people you loved, creating memories that would last long after the financial details were forgotten. The evening light was fading outside our Pacific Heights windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where Tessa's homework had been spread out just an hour earlier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight was about the simple pleasure of planning adventures with my daughter and appreciating how far we'd all come from that uncomfortable evening at the school fundraiser. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply building a life so fulfilling that the opinions of people who underestimated you become irrelevant. And sometimes, the most important victories are measured not in dollars or dramatic moments, but in the quiet confidence of a child who knows she's loved and secure, regardless of the complex adult world swirling around her. As Tessa continued to excitedly point out features of various vacation properties, I realized that this was exactly where I was supposed to be, not proving anything to anyone, but simply being present for the moments that actually mattered. The rest, as they say, was just details.